Well, hello friends, this is the coppertunist. Thank you for all your emails and messages of support and for staying a part of the coppertunity. On this last coppertunity that I have embarked on, I have obtained, as you can see, different types of pennies. These are pennies from Canada. You can take a look right here. You'll see all these Canadian pennies. They're pretty interesting. It's a similar investment to that of the copper pennies. Now these pennies from Canada from about 1920 to 1941, they were composed of 95% copper here. And then from 1942 to 1947, they were composed of 98% copper and weighing about 3¼ grams right here. So these pennies, in comparison to the ones from America, actually have a little bit more copper in them, at least 3% more copper, since their purity is 98%, and those of the US cents are 95% in purity. So these are a little bit higher purity. So they continue to make them out of 98% copper, believe it or not, up until 1996. So any penny in circulation that you can find that's from Canada, and if it's pre-1996, you know that it's 98% copper. Later, after that, from about 1997 to about 1999, if you find any of those pennies, let's see what this here is. This is 1981, so no, it's still copper. But if you get a 1997 through 1999, that's when they converted them into zinc, which is currently what the US is doing with their pennies. They have them at zinc. Then, after the millennium, the year 2000, Canada, they started to mint their pennies out of steel. So they've been doing them out of steel almost for about 12 years already. And the US is considering making their pennies out of steel, which will most likely happen by the end of this year, December of 2012, with their Coin and Modernization Act. They have to come up with a decision of what kind of alternate metal to use, and it really seems like steel is going to be the one, because Canada already does that, and the US did that in 1943 during the war, so they could save the copper for ammunition and shells. So that's a little bit of history there. I've also got something interesting to show you. I don't know if you can zoom in on this right here, and as you can see that the thickness of the copper pennies are somewhat a little bit different. We'll take some time here zooming in. We're gonna get the right zoom so it wasn't look blurry, so that you could see the differences. And right here, what I have pointing at right now, that is the stack of Canadian pennies. And right here, the one that I am pointing, that's the stack of American pennies. They're both 10 times each stacked, but as you can see, the Canadian pennies are a little bit larger in diameter. I mean, in their thickness. So their thickness is a little bit greater for the Canadian pennies. So if you can collect Canadian pennies, the ones that are 98%, somewhere between the year of 1942 and 1996, that are actually 98%, you have actually technically more copper, Canadians and the American pennies. Now the next thing I want to show you is their mass. So you saw that you have differences in mass and diameter and height. There's also a difference in mass. So what I'm doing here is I have 10. I've got 10 pennies here. I also want to show you some of the differences between the mass of pennies. Now doing one, the mass is not so accurate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take about 10 pennies right here. So I've got 10 pennies. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I'm going to get these 10 pennies and put them in a nice little bunch here. Turn on the scale. Set that scale to 0. And place the pennies. So as you can see, right now we're having some technical difficulties with the camera and the zooming. So it's the mass is 30.9 grams. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the same thing with a stack of Canadian pennies. So again, I will have 10. So I have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I'm going to take 10 of these set the balance to 0. As you can see, the mass there for this one is 32.1 grams. So it's about 1.1 grams heavier for a stack of 10 pennies comparison. So there they are compared. You could see because of the larger diameter and the more mass purity in there, definitely they're going to have a more density. So they're a little bit more heavier than the American pennies. So I'll just put some side by side here in my glove. Hopefully the camera can zoom in. Detail differences right here. So you can see right there, you've got on the top, on the left hand side, you've got some Canadian pennies, the reverse and the obverse, and you have also the reverse and the obverse of the American pennies. They look very similar, but just those slight differences give it the difference in mass here that you saw in the scale. Okay friends, so I have something else to show you. There's also a lot of these oxidized and circulated Canadian pennies, but the vendor, I also found the vendor, he had some of the nice, brilliant and uncirculated pennies right here, which I'll show you. These are cool, and the good thing about this vendor, he didn't have much, but at least he sold it to the coppertunist at a price of 1.5 face value, which is pretty good. You know, you're still pretty much getting them at face value. So right here, you know, there's just some brilliant, somewhat oxidized, you know, I mean, these rolls here, you look at the tape looks like it's been there for a long time. So these pennies here probably have been stacked probably in his shop for about maybe 10 or so years, perhaps even more. All of these pennies are 1957, 1957, 1957. They're all 57 copper Canadian pennies right here. So friends, that's the latest adventure that I've been on. I started collecting Canadian pennies. Now what I've heard and rumor, I don't know if it's a fact yet, but these Canadian pennies, apparently you could melt the Canadian pennies because they don't have the law that the American pennies have or the US pennies have, where you can't melt them or transport more than $5 of these pennies out of the border. But these Canadian pennies, apparently it's fair game. But don't count me on that one. Don't quote me on that one yet. I'm not for sure what the rules are for these Canadian pennies. But nevertheless, they are much more higher purity. Okay friends, that's the latest adventure I have been in. As soon as I come across new novelties, new types of copper investments here, I will make this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you seek out Canadian pennies because they're also worthwhile to get. They are higher in purity. And I hope you learned something. See you next time.